Hi, I'm Kevin Parker from CFE Media and Technology, and I'd like to speak with you for just a few minutes about some of the short-term, mid-term, and long-term ramifications of the coronavirus on the industries and markets that plant engineering serves. For the short-term impacts, I'm going to look at a presentation on best practices for essential manufacturing operations that was given by Swedgelock, and I can't tell you how impressed I was by it, how professional it was in the putting together and the presentation of it. For the intermediate impacts, I'm going to take a quick look at a story that I was first introduced to by Waygate Technologies about an open source design of a classic ventilator from the 1960s. And then as far as the long term goes, we'll look very briefly at the many U.S. manufacturing renaissance in the wake of supply chain disruptions caused by the virus. So let's get to it. Swedgelock, in case you did not know, is a maker of fluid system components, and it's headquartered in Salon, Ohio. And they gave this presentation, this briefing, which was hosted by Magnet, which is also known as the Manufacturing Advocacy and Growth Network. And it's a consultancy that supports manufacturers in Northeast Ohio. So the presentation itself was attended by over 200 manufacturers. And I think that by getting an idea of what Swedgelock was doing, they had a good idea of what kind of steps they should take if they're not back open already, how they can start to prepare for that. And Swedgelock had kind of a heads up on it since several years ago. They ran a tabletop exercise on what they would be called upon to do in the event of a pandemic. And I think just the fact that they had that on their mind, greater or lesser degree, gave them a head start with it. And I think one of the most interesting things to me about it was that I was listening to the briefing and I suddenly felt like I was back in the 1980s when I was in the engineering department at a place called Lindbergh, and all our procedures and processes and protocols were paper-based and not computerized in applications. And since there was no software application for managing a coronavirus, Swedgelock went right back to where we were prior to the introduction and wrote up paper documents that reflected their policies. And the steps that they took to continue operations included the following: enforcement of social distancing measures, associates self-check prior to entering sites, enhanced hygiene protocols in production and operations as based on CDC guidelines, mandatory remote work for all office associates, quarantining of associates reporting potential or confirmed exposure, staggered shifts to reduce population overlap, and a structured approach to communications within the management team and with its employees, associates, customers, and supply chain. So it was this deliberative approach that they took, relying on an abundance of caution, key documents, and individual responsibility, that allowed them to continue to operate as a going concern. And it is a going concern, as it includes Swedgelock is an approximately $2 billion privately held developer of fluid system products. Its manufacturing operations include about 5,500 employees at 20 manufacturing sites in the US, on the Isle of Man, and in mainland China. So as I mentioned, Swedgelock had already done this tabletop exercise years ago in which they thought about and looked ahead to what would be necessary in the event of a pandemic. And it was the realization of what was coming that led to the formation of a crisis response team that included 3 sub-teams: one for associate impact, another for business continuity for customers and supply chain, and third for communications, both internal and external. And I can say that I think this reliance on key documents and the formation of these teams to allocate responsibilities was really for the key for the success that they've had. Associates working at production sites were issued a letter that verified their role as part of a critical manufacturing enterprise. And that was available in the event that they were questioned by authorities, which in several cases has been known to happen. One of the most important documents that they generated was a self-check process for anyone visiting or working at any of the locations. At their facility in China, Swagelok had a doctor or medical personnel who were actually evaluating people as they entered the site. But that level of medical help was not evidently available here in the United States, and they didn't want unqualified people being the ones to say what was good and what wasn't. So they were really kind of forced back into a self-check verification and evaluation. But it's really detailed, and basically employee associates are saying they are not under quarantine at that moment. They have not experienced COVID-19 symptoms in the last 72 hours. They are not waiting for COVID test results. They have not had close contact or cared for someone diagnosed with COVID-19. They have not engaged in level 2 or level 3 travel as defined by the CDC, and they are not returning to work without a release to return to work from a medical provider. So once on the facility, achieving social distancing required cessation of all large group meetings. And there were a number of other steps that were taken for working in the plant itself. Work cells were separated from each other, or where that wasn't possible, plexiglass barriers between cells were installed. Managers' desks were moved. All interior doors were propped open. And in the rest areas, only one chair was available at each table. And you know, there were things that was necessary to do that you may not necessarily intuitively think, but even demonstrating to people what a 6 feet distance is apart from each other is part of that process. And then the last thing that Swagelok did was it shared a collection of all the documents that it had generated as part of management of this process and offered it to these manufacturers to download so they could start to put together their own procedures. So in conclusion, the government required, I already mentioned that, but Swagelok will provide masks for all employees, but their use at this point is optional. The company is providing guidelines on the proper use of homemade masks, but will not allow scarves due to potential entanglement issues. So there is really, as I say, a really most impressive presentation by Swagelok that I'm sure is being used by many of the 200 manufacturers that attended it in doing their own work. In the talk about intermediate impacts, I would say that there was another story that I was familiarized with, as I say, by Waygate Technologies, about a consortium of companies that have gotten together to reintroduce the Bird Mark 7 ventilator, which was first introduced in 1957 by Dr. Forrest M. Bird, who actually is an American aviator, inventor, and biomedical engineer, who is best known for having created some of the first reliable mass-produced mechanical ventilators for acute and chronic cardiopulmonary care. The Mark 7 is one of those, and its signature green casing was a feature of the 1960s hospital scene. It was considered reliable, safe, and an effective application for patients with respiratory problems. So today, the National Strategic Research Institute, the NSRI, University of California, Davis, and Livermore Instruments have partnered to rapidly redesign the Mark 7 to include simplified supply chain components and to mass produce a modern version that adds critical features. David Ferguson, CEO of mass spectrometer manufacturer Livermore, said the goal is to help meet global demand for the ventilator through an open source specification for production of the updated Mark 7. quote, when we got into the Bird Mark 7, we realized it could be made on a massive scale in a way that the more modern ventilators just can't. We need to respond to this opportunity and get this redesigned ventilator into the hands of our healthcare practitioners immediately. We welcome colleagues to join us to make this happen, close quote, Ferguson said. Through publicizing their project in Ames, Livermore Instruments was put in touch with 3D Systems, an innovator of 3D printing that provides digital manufacturing solutions worldwide. So without going into a lot of detail about how all of this was accomplished, it's just clear that design references for the Mark 7 existed, but from a manufacturing perspective, parts designed and built before the digital age may not be completely representative in the available source documentation. In other words, they needed to do some reverse engineering. And since they couldn't tear open the manifold examples that they had, they used some technology from Wategate Technologies, which is known for developing equipment that produces high quality computed tomography scans of industrial parts, such as the turbine blades and jet engines. So they used this to reverse engineer the manifold on the ventilator, and they were able to accomplish their goal. Now that the modified prototype has been validated, Livermore will commence mass production of the new Mark 19, as it has been named, and simultaneously disclose its design and processes to the world to encourage competition. Livermore Instruments and its Mark 19 consortium partners plan to begin shipping units on June 1st at a rate of 10,000 per week and at an initial cost of $700 per unit. So that's another one of what you might call a feel-good story coming out of the coronavirus crisis. But at the same time, it's more than just a feel-good. It is a demonstration of real ability to make things, to get things done, which is one of the most important things. And there's some other stories also coming out about ventilators, mechanical ventilator Milano, designed by Fermilab physicists and engineers, and being assembled by an Italian factory of the device maker Elemaster. And just Fermilab is literally right across from the street from where I sit now. So that's another story that's hitting nice and close to home when it comes to American engineering ingenuity. The last topic that I'm going to allude to, as I discussed in the beginning, was all of the calls that we're hearing for a manufacturing renaissance in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. And while nearly 3 or 4 of respondents to the coronavirus impact survey that's been conducted by CFE Media and Technology said their businesses are negatively affected, they also say that the strategies they feel the U.S. government should review to help address the situation include incentivize reshoring of key manufacturing segments back to the U.S., investment in medical research and development to speed vaccine development and virus testing capabilities, and do more to promote manufacturing automation where production can be completed with minimum operator involvement. And it certainly is true that companies may very well want to accelerate their digital transformation, as one guest on MSNBC's Morning Joe said. But there's a reason why all of the manufacturing left the United States in the first place. And despite the virtue of it coming back to the United States, despite its efficacy, and despite the wishes we all may have, unless something changes in the economic incentives, unless it becomes as rewarding to make things as it would be to simply invest in the stock market, it's not likely to happen, unfortunately. So that's all we have time for today. We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope to continue to speak with you on some of these emergent issues in the very near future. Thanks.